She found out she was pregnant 3 days after he boarded the flight to London. She sat alone on the bathroom floor of their apartment, the one they had picked out together, the one with the cracked tile by the sink he always promised to fix, holding a test that changed everything. Her hands were shaking. She tried calling him twice. He didn't pick up. The third time, his phone went straight to voicemail, and she understood, in the way you understand things that crack something permanently inside you, that she was completely on her own. She never called again. If you've ever loved someone who chose something else over you, stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Ethan Carter had not planned to come back to New York. He had spent 5 years building a careful, deliberate life on the other side of the Atlantic. Structured mornings, back-to-back meetings, airports, and hotel rooms that all eventually blurred into one another. London had given him everything he thought he wanted at 29. A senior position at Meridian Capital Group, a corner office that looked out over the Thames, a reputation as the kind of man who closed difficult deals without breaking a sweat. He had convinced himself that the life he left behind in New York was simply the cost of becoming the person he was supposed to be. He had told himself that so many times it had almost stopped hurting. The call that brought him home came at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. His mother's voice on the phone, steadier than it had any right to be, told him his father had suffered a cardiac episode the night before and was in intensive care at Meridian General Hospital in Manhattan. She said the words clearly, efficiently, the way Margaret Carter always delivered bad news, as though emotion was something to be managed rather than felt. But Ethan heard the small break underneath all that composure, the breath she took before she said the word serious, and he had his assistant booking him a flight before the call was finished. He landed at JFK on a gray Thursday morning with a carry-on bag, a head full of transatlantic fatigue, and the particular guilt that belongs to children who have stayed away too long. His father, James Carter, was stable by the time Ethan arrived at the hospital. He was sitting up in bed looking irritated about the number of wires attached to his chest, which Ethan took as a good sign. His mother was in the chair beside the bed with a paperback novel she wasn't actually reading. The three of them spent about 40 minutes pretending everything was fine before Ethan's father looked at him directly and said, "You look tired, Ethan. Not the good kind." "I'm fine, Dad." "You've been fine for 5 years," James said. "That's not the same as actually being fine." Ethan didn't have an answer for that, which was its own kind of answer. His father was moved out of intensive care the following afternoon. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. There would be a procedure, a recovery period, lifestyle adjustments. But the immediate crisis had passed. Margaret had the situation under control with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and Ethan found himself with an unexpected pocket of time and no particular place to be. The hospital administration, aware that Ethan represented Meridian Capital, had arranged a brief tour of their recently renovated pediatric wing as part of an ongoing discussion about a potential endowment. It was the kind of thing Ethan normally delegated, but his father was sleeping, his mother was on the phone with his sister in Boston, and a young administrator named Derek Paulson was standing in the hallway with an enthusiastic expression and a laminated visitor badge, so Ethan agreed. He told himself it would pass the time. He did not tell himself anything about what he was actually afraid of, which was being alone in a hospital room with his thoughts and 5 years' worth of things he'd been carefully not thinking about. The pediatric wing was bright in the deliberate way that children's hospitals always are. Primary colors on the walls, illustrated murals of cartoon animals and sunlit meadows, the kind of cheerful effort that tries very hard to make a frightening place feel safe. Derek narrated steadily as they walked. New imaging equipment, a renovated surgical suite, a partnership with a university research program. Ethan nodded at the right intervals and asked the right questions and was only half present for any of it. They rounded a corner near the nursing station, and Derek began explaining something about the new outpatient consultation rooms, and that was when Ethan stopped walking entirely. At the far end of this hallway, crouching down to eye level with a small boy who was sitting in a chair outside one of the rooms, was a woman Ethan recognized so immediately and so completely that the recognition felt physical, like something landing in the center of his chest. Natalie Brooks. She was wearing scrubs the color of deep blue, a stethoscope draped around her neck, her dark hair pulled back in the same slightly imperfect way she'd always worn it when she was concentrating on something. She was talking to the boy in a low, gentle voice, and the boy was nodding seriously, his small legs swinging off the edge of the chair. She reached up and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear, a gesture so specific to her, so entirely unchanged, and Ethan felt the air go wrong in his lungs. "Mr. Carter?" Derek said. "Are you all right?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Sorry, keep going." He didn't move. He watched Natalie stand up from her crouch and say something else to the boy, and the boy looked up at her with complete trust, and then something shifted in Ethan's chest because he was really looking at the child now, really seeing him. The boy was maybe 4 or 5 years old, dark hair that curled slightly at the ears, a narrow face, pointed chin, and eyes. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the color of those eyes, a particular shade of gray-blue that Ethan had grown up seeing in his own reflection every morning of his life. He stood completely still in the middle of that bright animated hallway for what felt like a very long time. "Mr. Carter?" Derek said again, with the careful tone of a person who has noticed something is wrong but doesn't know what. "Who is that doctor?" Ethan asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Derek followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Dr. Brooks. She heads up our pediatric oncology unit. She's been with us about 4 years now, one of the best we have. Is there something—" "And the child," Ethan said. "The boy she's with." Derek paused. "I'm not sure. Probably a patient sibling waiting for a family member. We see that a lot." Natalie had straightened fully now, and she must have sensed something, the way people sometimes do when they're being watched, because she turned her head toward the hallway entrance. The moment she saw him, she went completely still. It lasted only a second or two. Then she said something quietly to the boy, touched his shoulder, and walked toward Ethan with the careful expression of someone who is managing a very strong reaction. "Mr. Carter," Derek said brightly, reading the situation in entirely the wrong direction, "can I introduce you to one of our lead physicians? Dr. Brooks, this is Ethan Carter from Meridian Capital. He's here regarding the—" "I know who he is," Natalie said. Her voice was the same. That was the first thing Ethan registered. The same steady, slightly low register, the careful precision of someone who chose words intentionally. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not anger exactly, or at least not only anger. Something more complicated. Something that had been sitting for years. "Natalie," he said. "Ethan." Derek looked between them. "Should I can give you a moment." "That won't be necessary," Natalie said. At the same moment, Ethan said, "Yes, please." A beat of silence. Derek took a slow step backward. "I'll just check on the surgical suite access for the next part of the tour. I'll be right down the hall." He moved away with the practiced tact of someone who has learned to disappear quickly. Ethan and Natalie stood in the middle of the pediatric hallway, surrounded by painted murals of cartoon animals and the distant sounds of a children's ward, looking at each other for the first time in 5 years. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Why are you here?" she asked. The words were even, but there was something underneath them that was not. "My father, he had a cardiac event. He's stable now, but they needed me to—" "I heard," she said. "Margaret called the hospital. I didn't know you were coming." He noticed she said Margaret, not your mother. He noticed that she had apparently stayed in contact with his family in the years he'd been gone, and that the knowledge of that hit him somewhere unpleasant. "Natalie, Ethan, I'm in the middle of a shift." She glanced back over her shoulder toward the boy in the chair. "I don't really have time for whatever this is." "I'm not trying to make it into anything," he said. I was surprised to see you." She looked at him for a moment. "I work here. I've worked here for 4 years." "I know, Derek just told me." "Then you know I'm not surprised you didn't know that." She said it without heat. That was almost worse than if she'd said it with heat. She turned slightly, as if to go, and then Ethan said the thing he probably shouldn't have said yet. The thing he'd been standing in the hallway trying not to say while his brain raced through calculations that kept arriving at the same impossible answer. "Natalie, that boy, the one you were talking to." She went very still again. "Who is he?" The silence lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. In that silence, Ethan watched something move across Natalie's face. a complicated geography of emotion that he didn't have names for all of, but could see included things like fear and exhaustion and something that might have been a long-held grief finally being asked to move. "He's a patient's brother," she said. She said it with a flatness that told him immediately it wasn't true. "Natalie." "Ethan, don't." "He has—" Ethan stopped. His voice had gone unsteady somewhere he wasn't expecting. His eyes, stop, "are the same color as mine." He said it quietly, not as an accusation, almost as a question, except he already knew the answer, and they both knew he knew. Natalie looked away from him. She was looking at the boy in the chair, who had apparently become bored during the wait, and was now industriously folding the corner of a pamphlet he'd picked up from somewhere. He had the slightly frustrated, focused expression of a child who is trying very hard to make an origami shape and not quite getting it right. "His name," Ethan said, barely above a whisper, "is Noah," Natalie said. It came out like something she'd been holding in her chest for 5 years. Ethan put one hand against the wall because his body needed something to do with the information his brain was processing. The hallway noise continued around him, a cart rolling somewhere, a phone ringing at the nurse's station, the faraway sound of a child laughing in one of the rooms, and none of it seemed to have anything to do with where he was standing. "How old is he?" "Ethan." "How old?" She turned back to look at him. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were steady, but the steadiness was the kind that requires effort. "He'll be 5 in March," she said. Ethan did the math. He didn't want to do the math. He did it anyway. March. 5 years old in March. That put Noah's birth at March of last year, which meant conception would have been June. 5 years ago. 2 weeks before Ethan boarded the plane to London. He pressed his back against the wall now, no longer caring about the performance of composure. "You were pregnant," he said, "when I left." "I didn't know yet when you left." "But you found out." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost the careful evenness. Not loud. Natalie never got loud, but raw in a way he hadn't heard before. "I found out 3 days after you left. I called you, twice. The third time your phone was off." "I didn't know you called. I never saw—" "I know you didn't see it," she said, "because you'd already decided. You'd made your choice. And I was standing in our bathroom at 2 in the morning looking at a positive pregnancy test, and I understood that very clearly. Natalie, if I had known—" "What?" she said. "What would you have done?" The question landed hard because he didn't have an answer he could say with certainty. He didn't know what the 29-year-old version of himself would have done with that information, and they both knew it, and the not knowing was its own kind of indictment. "I should have come back," he said. "I should have—" "You should have a lot of things," she said quietly. "So should I. But here we are." She glanced back at Noah, who had given up on the origami, and was now swinging his legs and examining something on the ceiling with intense curiosity. There was something in the way she looked at him, automatic, constant, the surveillance of a parent who never fully stops watching, that made Ethan's chest ache in a way he didn't have good words for. "You raised him alone," Ethan said. "Yes, for 5 years. He's 4, she said, nearly 5, and yes." He looked at his son, whom he had never met, who had grown an entire life, first words, first steps, first days of preschool, the whole unfolding of a small human person, without Ethan knowing he existed. The weight of that was extraordinary, not dramatic in the movie sense, just genuinely, quietly crushing in the way that real loss tends to be. "I want to—" he started. "Ethan." Her voice was not unkind, but it was firm in the way of someone who has already had every version of this conversation in her head. "You've been here for approximately 5 minutes. Noah doesn't know you. He doesn't know who you are. You can't just—" "I know," he said quickly. "I know that. I'm not trying to— I don't want to walk up there and introduce myself as his father. I understand that's not how this works." She looked at him carefully, assessing, the way she always assessed things, methodically, without rushing. It was one of the things he'd always respected about her. She never made decisions under pressure that she hadn't already thought through. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to know him," Ethan said. "I want—" I don't know exactly what the right thing looks like, but I know I don't want to walk out of this hospital and pretend I didn't see him." Natalie was quiet for a long moment. In the chair at the end of the hallway, Noah had apparently solved whatever mystery the ceiling presented and had moved on to examining his own shoe with great interest. "He's a good kid," she said finally. Not as an invitation, more like something she said before she could stop herself. "He looks it," Ethan said. Another silence. "My shift ends at 6, she said. He waited. "There's a coffee place 2 blocks north of the hospital, Hudson and 74th. It's usually quiet after 7. She said it the way people say things they're not entirely sure they should be saying. "Don't read more into that than I mean. This isn't me saying anything is forgiven or that anything has changed." "I understand. I just think," she said carefully, "that you and I need to have a conversation before anything else happens. Before Noah is involved in any of this at all." "Yes," he said. "Absolutely. Whatever you want." She gave him a long look. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that is less about agreement and more about closing a door before you've decided what's on the other side of it. She turned and walked back toward Noah, who looked up when she approached and said something that made her smile. A real one, unguarded, the kind Ethan had seen 1,000 times 5 years ago and hadn't seen directed at anything since. He stood in the hallway and watched his son hand her a badly folded piece of paper with the serious expression of someone presenting a significant gift. She took it with both hands like it was something precious. Ethan turned away before she looked back in his direction. He found Derek waiting dutifully near the stairwell, trying to look as though he had not been watching any of that. Ethan thanked him and moved through the rest of the tour on autopilot, nodding, asking questions, making the right noises. While somewhere in the back of his mind he kept seeing the same image on repeat. Blue-gray eyes, his eyes. Looking up at the ceiling with the pure, unbothered curiosity of a child who doesn't yet know that anything has been lost. He got to the coffee shop on Hudson Street 40 minutes early and sat in the corner booth facing the door. The place was almost empty by 7:15. A few people with laptops, a couple sharing a slice of something near the window. Ethan sat with a coffee he wasn't really drinking and turned his phone face down on the table and tried to arrange his thoughts into some kind of order. He couldn't. 5 years ago, he had made a decision. He had told himself it was the right one, that Natalie was strong and talented and would land on her feet, that they were too young to let one relationship anchor a future, that the London position was a once-in-a-generation opportunity that he'd worked his whole career toward. He had told himself all of those things, and most of them had even been true. But true things can still be the wrong choice, and that was the uncomfortable territory he'd been living in without fully acknowledging it for 5 years. He had chosen a career over a woman who loved him. That was the plain shape of it. And in doing so, he had also, without knowing it, chosen not to be present for the beginning of a life that was half his. That part wasn't forgivable the same way the first part wasn't forgivable. He knew that. He wasn't going to walk into this conversation asking for forgiveness. He didn't know exactly what he was going to walk in asking for, which was its own problem. He heard the door open at 7:22. Natalie came in wearing a jacket over her scrubs, her hair down from the ponytail, looking the particular kind of tired that belongs to people who have been on their feet in a demanding job all day and are now about to have an emotionally taxing conversation on top of it. She spotted him in the corner and walked over without looking at the counter. She sat down across from him without taking off her jacket. "Coffee?" he asked. "Already had 3 today." She set her bag on the bench beside her. "I can't do another one." "Okay." She looked at him. He looked at her. "So," she said. "So," he said. A beat of silence that had about 6 years of history compressed into it. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "Neither do I." She folded her hands on the table. "I've thought about this conversation, not exactly this version of it, but some version of it, a lot over the years. I had about 40 different scripts. None of them feel right now that it's actually happening." Yeah, he said. "Same." She looked at him steadily. "You want to ask me why I didn't tell you? I mean, I'll answer it before you ask," she said. "Because I've been running that question in my head since this afternoon, and I want to just say it out loud once, and then I don't want to keep coming back to it." She paused. I tried to reach you twice. You didn't answer. The third time I called, you were already unreachable. And I made a decision, not an easy one, that you had already made your choice. You chose London. You chose the career. You made that very clear before you left. And I decided that calling you back and saying, wait, I'm pregnant, I didn't want that. I didn't want you coming back out of obligation. I didn't want Noah growing up with a father who resented being pulled back from the life he'd chosen. Ethan started to speak. I'm not finished, she said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He closed his mouth. I raised him. I built a life. I finished my residency. I got the position here. I figured out childcare and preschool and ear infections at 3 a.m. and all of the 10,000 things that come with doing this alone. And I am not... She stopped, pressed her lips together for a moment. I'm not angry with you for not knowing he existed. I am angry with you for the thing that happened before that, for leaving the way you left, for making a decision about our future without asking me what I wanted. But that's a different conversation, and I've had 5 years to process it. I'm not here to relitigate it tonight. Okay, he said quietly. What I'm here to say, she continued, is that Noah is 4 years old. He is 4 years old, and he has a life and routines and friends from preschool and a pediatrician he likes and a favorite book that we read 3 times a week and a very strong opinion about which color cup his juice goes in. He has a whole, functioning, real life. And you appearing in it is not a small thing. You cannot appear in it and then disappear again. That is the one thing, the only thing, I absolutely cannot allow. I understand that. Do you? She looked at him directly. Because you have a life in London. You have a job, and presumably a lease, and a whole structure that exists over there. And in a few weeks, once your father is better, you'll go back to it. That's a real thing I have to consider. I don't have to go back, he said. She stared at him. I'm not saying that to impress you, he said, or to say the right thing. I'm saying it because it's true. My life in London it's portable. I've been running the American accounts remotely for the past 18 months anyway. There's nothing anchoring me over there except a decision I made 5 years ago that I've been unwilling to revisit. She was quiet for a moment. You can't make decisions like that in a coffee shop 3 hours after seeing him for the first time. I know. You need to actually think about what you want, what you're capable of, what showing up consistently for a child actually requires. It's not weekend visits. It's not big gestures. I know that too, he said. I'm not asking you to hand me anything. I'm not expecting anything. He stopped, tried again. I want to know him, that's all. Whatever that looks like, at whatever pace makes sense, whatever you decide is appropriate, I just want to not be someone who didn't know his son existed and then walked away from that information. Natalie looked at the table, then at her hands, then out the window where the street was dark and ordinary outside. He's funny, she said finally. Her voice had changed again, softer, the way it always went when she was talking about something she loved without meaning to show it. He does this thing where he pretends not to know the answer to something and then announces it like he just figured it out in the moment, but you can tell he knew the whole time. He's been doing it since he was about 2. I don't know where he got it. Ethan thought about his own father, who did almost exactly that thing. Who would ask questions he already knew the answers to just to watch people arrive at the conclusion themselves? He didn't say that out loud. He sounds incredible, he said instead. He is. She said it the way parents say things like that, not with pride exactly, more with a kind of permanent wonder at the fact of the person. He is really, genuinely incredible, which is why I have to be careful. I know. I mean it, Ethan. I know you do. He met her eyes. I'm not going to push. I'm not going to make demands. I'm not going to try to insert myself in a way that isn't earned. I understand that I don't have rights here that I haven't built yet. She looked at him for a long time. My father gets out of ICU tomorrow, he said. I'll be in New York for at least another 3 weeks, probably longer. She nodded slowly. I'm not asking to meet him tomorrow, Ethan said. I'm not asking for anything specific tonight. I'm just asking, is there a conversation we can keep having while I'm here about what might be possible? Natalie was quiet for so long that he thought she was going to say no. She was looking at the window again, at the dark street with its passing headlights, and she had the expression of someone weighing something that has weight on both sides. "I'll think about it," she said finally. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't the other thing either. He nodded. They sat there for another 20 minutes, not talking about Noah or London or the past. She told him the hospital had opened a new pediatric research program she was involved in. He told her his father had apparently been sneaking salt for years against his doctor's orders and seemed annoyed about being caught. Small things, not the hard things. When she left, she stood up, slung her bag over her shoulder, and looked at him with that same complicated, unreadable expression she'd had in the hallway. "He likes the color orange," she said, "in case that's ever relevant." Then she walked out into the November night, and Ethan sat alone in the quiet coffee shop with a cold cup of coffee and the sound of his own heartbeat and the knowledge that somewhere, a few miles uptown, a small boy with his eyes was sleeping in a bed in an apartment he'd never seen, dreaming dreams Ethan knew nothing about. He sat there for a long time. Then he picked up his phone, called his assistant in London, and said he would need to rearrange his calendar for the foreseeable future. He didn't explain why. Some things, he was beginning to understand, don't start with explanations. They start with the simple, difficult act of staying put. Natalie didn't call him. He hadn't expected her to exactly, but he'd spent the first 3 days after the coffee shop checking his phone more than he wanted to admit. He kept the volume up, which he never did. He kept the screen from auto-locking so he'd see notifications faster. He told himself it was because he was waiting on updates about his father's procedure, which was true, but not the whole truth, and he was old enough now to at least be honest with himself about the difference. His father's angioplasty went smoothly on a Friday morning. By the following Tuesday, James Carter was home in the Riverside Drive apartment he and Margaret had lived in for 30 years, annoyed about his restricted diet and extremely vocal about it. Ethan set up his laptop at the dining room table and worked through the mornings while his mother made low-sodium soups that his father described, loudly and with feeling, as punishment in a bowl. It was the most time Ethan had spent in that apartment since he was 25. He found it strange being back in the physical spaces where he'd grown up. The same bookshelves, the same slightly uneven floor in the kitchen, the framed photographs arranged along the hallway wall that documented 30 years of a family's life in the particular frozen way photographs always do. He found a picture of himself at maybe 8 years old, standing beside his father at some outdoor thing, a park, a school event, somewhere with trees, and he stood in front of it for longer than made any rational sense. He had his father's jaw, his mother's coloring, and somewhere across the city, a small boy had his eyes. On Thursday of that week, 11 days after the hospital, his phone rang with an unknown number. He picked up on the second ring. "It's Natalie," she said. He sat down. He'd been standing at the window. He sat down in the chair beside it. "Hi." "Hi." A pause. "Noah's preschool does a thing on Saturdays. A parent and child morning at the Botanic Garden. We go most weeks when the weather is okay." Another pause, shorter this time. He likes looking at the greenhouse, the tropical section. He thinks it's funny that it's warm in there when it's cold outside. Ethan waited. "You could come," she said, "not as his father, obviously not yet, just as someone who knows me. If anyone asks, you're an old friend who's in town." "Okay," he said. He said it carefully, without too much weight, because he could hear how much effort it had cost her to make this call, and he didn't want to tip anything by reacting the wrong way. "It's low pressure," she said, as if convincing herself as much as him. "He's going to be focused on the plants and the other kids. He might not pay much attention to you at all." "That's fine. And if at any point it feels wrong, if I decide it's too much, we leave, and that's it." "Understood." She gave him the address and the time and hung up without much ceremony. He put his phone down on the arm of the chair and sat there for a minute. Through the window, a November sky was doing the particular New York thing where it couldn't decide between overcast and actually gray, and the street below had the purposeful early morning energy that the city always generates regardless of season or circumstance. He thought about what Natalie had said 11 days ago, about Noah's favorite color, about the cup with the right color for his juice. He thought, I have 11 days of information about a 4-year-old boy who has been alive for nearly 5 years. That is the entirety of what I know about my son. He sat with that until it stopped feeling like something he could hold and started feeling like something he had to live inside. Then he got up, went back to his laptop, and tried to work. Check tick. The Botanic Garden on Saturday morning was the particular kind of cold that November does in New York. Not brutal yet, but with the warning of brutality in it, the air carrying the advance notice of what December intends. Ethan arrived 8 minutes early and stood near the entrance feeling overdressed in a way he couldn't entirely explain, given that he was wearing his most ordinary clothes. He'd stood in front of his bag for 20 minutes trying to decide what a person wears to meet their son for the first time without their son knowing that's what's happening. And he had eventually just put on a dark jacket and dark jeans because overthinking your clothes is its own kind of problem. He saw Natalie before she saw him. She was coming through the gate with Noah on one side of her, the boy's hand in hers. Noah talking about something with the animated, relentless energy of a child whose brain moves faster than his words. He was wearing a bright orange puffer coat. Of course he was, Ethan thought, Natalie had told him, and a knit hat that had slid slightly sideways, which he seemed unbothered by. Natalie spotted Ethan and said something to Noah that made the boy look up, locate Ethan, and then return immediately to whatever he'd been saying, satisfied. 4-year-olds have very clear priority hierarchies. A stranger near the entrance was not at the top of Noah's. "Hey," Natalie said when they reached him. She looked like she was bracing for something which he understood. "Hey," he said. Noah looked up at him with frank, uncomplicated appraisal. The way small children look at new adults? Not suspicious exactly, just taking stock. He had Ethan's eyes. Up close, it was even more striking than it had been in the hospital hallway, and Ethan had to work to keep his expression from doing something he'd regret. "This is my friend Ethan," Natalie said. "He's visiting the city." "Hi," Noah said. Then, without waiting for a response, "There's a flower in the greenhouse that smells like a dead fish." "Noah," Natalie started. "It's true," Noah said. "Mama took a picture of the sign. Tell him what it's called." "It's called a corpse flower," Natalie said, in the tone of a parent who has explained this many times. "And it doesn't smell right now. It only smells when it blooms." "But when it does smell," Noah said to Ethan, with the confidential tone of someone sharing important intelligence, "it smells like a dead fish and rotting meat." "That sounds pretty bad," Ethan said. "It's actually really interesting," Noah said, "because that's how it gets pollinated. The bugs think it's food." He had the careful pronunciation of a child who has recently learned a word he finds valuable. Pollinated. "Where did you learn that?" Ethan asked. Noah looked at him like this was an odd question. "From the sign, at the greenhouse." He paused, reconsidering. "Also, Mama explained it 3 times. Natalie made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Shall we go in?" she said, and they went in. The morning did not go the way Ethan had scripted it in his head, which was probably good, because the version in his head had been somewhat cinematic in ways real life generally refuses to be. What actually happened was that Noah talked almost constantly, so about the plants, about a kid from preschool named Marcus, who apparently had opinions about dinosaurs that Noah found questionable, about the fact that the tropical greenhouse made his glasses fog up, which he seemed to find both annoying and funny. He was not particularly focused on Ethan. He was focused on everything, with the distributed, omnivorous attention of a small child for whom the world is still genuinely new and interesting. Ethan mostly walked alongside them and listened. Occasionally, Noah would direct something at him, a fact about a plant he'd just read on a sign, or a question about whether Ethan had ever been to this greenhouse before, and Ethan would answer, and Noah would nod and move on. It was comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when nobody is performing. At one point, in front of a large display of orchids, Noah climbed up on the lowest rung of the display railing to see better and immediately lost his footing. Ethan was closer than Natalie and caught him without thinking, just grabbed the back of the orange coat and steadied him before he fell, set him back on his feet, and said, "Careful." Noah looked up at him. "Thanks," he said. Then he went back to looking at the orchid. It was completely ordinary. It was also the first time Ethan had ever touched his son. He looked at his own hand for a second, which was stupid. He knew it was stupid, but he did it anyway. Natalie had seen it. She was watching him with that careful expression again. Not quite guarded, not quite open. Somewhere in between. He couldn't tell what she was thinking. He didn't try to. They got hot chocolate at the garden cafe afterward. Noah got a child-sized one that he declared insufficiently chocolatey and then proceeded to drink entirely anyway. And Ethan sat across from them in a way that felt so ordinary and so impossible at the same time that he kept having to redirect his attention to stay present rather than disappearing into the strangeness of the situation. Noah asked him, out of nowhere, what his job was. "I work in finance," Ethan said. Noah considered this. "Like a bank?" "Kind of like a bank, but different. I help businesses get money to grow." "Oh." Noah thought about this. "My friend Marcus's dad drives a truck. Marcus thinks that's cooler than a bank." "Marcus might be right," Ethan said. Noah appeared to approve of this answer. He went back to his hot chocolate. On the walk back to the entrance, Noah's hand found Natalie's automatically, the way a child's hand does when they're thinking about something else entirely, and the connection is pure habit and trust. Natalie squeezed it without looking down. It was the smallest thing. It was also the most complete demonstration Ethan had seen in a long time of what it meant to be someone's whole world. At the gate, Natalie stopped and said, "Noah, can you wait right here for 1 second? Don't move." She walked a few steps away with Ethan. "He liked you," she said quietly. "He barely registered me," Ethan said. "That's what I mean," she said. "If he was uncertain about someone, you'd know. He gets very polite and formal in a way that's obviously not real." A beat. "With you, he was just himself." Ethan looked back at Noah, who was currently attempting to step only on the dark stones in the path and avoiding the light ones with the serious concentration of a child who has assigned himself a complex game. "He's something, Natalie," she nodded. "Not with pride this time, shite, or not only that, with something more exhausted and more real." "Yeah," she said. "He is." "Thank you," he said. "For today." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me yet. Today was easy." She paused. "Easy days aren't the test." He understood what she meant. He nodded. She went back to Noah, who grabbed her hand and said something about getting lunch somewhere with good grilled cheese, and Ethan stood at the garden gate and watched them walk up the street until they turned the corner and were gone. He stood there another minute after that. Then he started walking, without any particular destination, just letting the November city move around him, and he thought about a small hand automatically finding its mother's, and about what it meant to be that reliable, to be so constant that someone's hand just knew, without looking, where to go. Gum. He came back. That was the thing Natalie had not been certain would happen, and then the thing she had to adjust to when it did. He called 3 days later and asked if there was another morning like Saturday, something where Noah would be in a context where a new presence was natural. She said yes, cautiously. There was a Sunday afternoon thing at a play space in Brooklyn that a few of the preschool families used. She said she'd think about it. She thought about it for 2 days, during which time she had a conversation with her friend Dana, the only person besides her mother who knew the whole situation, that went roughly like this. "He came back," Natalie said. "He literally just arrived a week ago," Dana said. "I mean, he came back for a second time, Saturday. He did the thing I said I would judge him on. And he was good. He was just a person. He wasn't performing anything." "That's good," Dana said. "Or it's strategic," Natalie said. "Natalie, I'm serious." "I know you are," Dana said. "But you're also the person who sees a good thing happening and immediately tries to find the angle on it. That's not fair." "It's a little fair." Natalie was quiet for a moment. "Noah liked him." "Of course he did," Dana said. "Noah likes everyone who doesn't panic around kids. Most adults panic. This guy apparently didn't panic. He caught him when he almost fell off the railing. See? Reflexes of a person who was actually paying attention. That doesn't mean anything." "It means he was paying attention," Dana said. "That's not nothing." Natalie called Ethan the following morning and gave him the Brooklyn address. The weeks that followed had a rhythm that developed without anyone explicitly planning it. Saturday mornings or Sunday afternoons, usually in a context that included other people. A park, a children's museum trip, twice at the Botanic Garden because Noah kept wanting to go back and check on the corpse flower. Ethan showed up without being asked twice, didn't push for more than what was offered, and was patient in a way that Natalie found herself watching with a kind of suspended skepticism, waiting for the seam to show. She couldn't find the seam. Noah liked him. That was just the fact of it. Kids are not always good judges of character. They like whoever gives them attention and doesn't act weird around them. But they are good at detecting performance, and Noah had no radar going off around Ethan. He treated Ethan the way he treated the other peripheral adults in his life, with easy comfort and the assumption that the adult would be there when he looked up. That assumption was new. Noah had never had a consistent male presence before, and Natalie had been watchful about it. She'd seen what it did to kids, the ones in her care at the hospital who were missing a parent, the particular way that absence became a kind of gravitational pull even when they couldn't name what was pulling. She'd been managing that with Noah for years, making sure he had his grandfather, her father, who came into the city once a month, making sure his preschool teacher was warm, building a structural stability that could compensate. She hadn't anticipated what would happen when someone just showed up and kept showing up. Around the third week, Noah started talking about Ethan in the casual way he talked about established people. Ethan said that fish can see in the dark, he said at dinner one night, completely unprompted. Or, does Ethan like dogs? I want to ask him. He didn't ask where Ethan came from or why he was around, because kids don't ask those questions when a presence makes sense to them in a body-level way that precedes language. Natalie watched this and felt something complicated that she didn't try to name all at once. The first time it was the three of them at the apartment was an accident, basically. Noah had a minor meltdown at the end of a park afternoon because he was overtired and cold, and instead of trying to navigate the subway with an inconsolable 4-year-old, Natalie made the pragmatic call to suggest they come back to her place for the rest of the afternoon while Noah calmed down. She'd made the offer before she thought about the implications, and she watched Ethan register that he understood the implications but wasn't going to say anything about them. He was good with Noah during the meltdown, which she hadn't expected. He didn't try to fix it or reason with it or make it stop. He just sat on the floor next to Noah's spot on the couch and said, "That sounds really frustrating," and let Noah be frustrated until it ran out. When Noah emerged from the other side of it 20 minutes later, red-eyed and slightly embarrassed the way kids get after they've lost it, Ethan said, "You want to show me that book your mom said you like?" And Noah said yes and disappeared to get it. The book was about deep-sea creatures. Noah read it to Ethan, in the reading style of a pre-reader, which involved narrating what was in the pictures with great authority and occasionally making things up. And Ethan sat next to him on the couch and listened with the focused attention of someone who was entirely present. Natalie stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them for a moment she didn't plan. Noah was explaining something about an anglerfish with the dangerous light on its head. Ethan was asking questions in the tone of someone who genuinely wanted to know. Their heads were both bent over the book, dark hair, similar angles, the same slight tilt when concentrating. And the similarity was so obvious that anyone seeing them without context would have already known. She went back to the kitchen. She cut vegetables for dinner with more concentration than vegetables required. They had the conversation they'd been circling around on a Tuesday evening in December, 6 weeks after the Botanic Garden. Noah was in bed. Ethan had stayed for dinner after the apartment afternoon became a thing that happened occasionally, and dinner had become a thing that happened occasionally too. Not romantic, both of them careful about the way they occupied the space, but present in a way that was accumulating its own weight. Natalie made pasta. Ethan washed the dishes, which he'd started doing because she cooked and it was the obvious reciprocity, and neither of them commented on the domesticity of it. After the dishes, they sat at the kitchen table with the low light on and the sounds of a quiet apartment around them. The specific nighttime quiet of a place where a child is sleeping, and so you automatically lower your voice. "He asked me today," Natalie said. Ethan looked at her. He said, "Is Ethan my friend?" She turned her coffee mug in her hands. And I said yes. And he thought about it for a second, and then he said, "My own friend or yours?" And I didn't quite know what to say to that. "What did you say?" Ethan asked. "I said you were both." She looked at him. "I think he was trying to figure out what category to put you in. Kids do that." "I know," he said. Then, "What category do you want him to put me in?" Natalie set her mug down. She'd known this question was coming, a version of it, in some form, And she'd been turning over her answer for weeks without arriving anywhere clean. I don't know how to answer that without knowing what's sustainable, she said. That's the honest answer. It's not about whether I want him to know. It's about whether, when he knows, you're going to be there in a way that holds. I am, Ethan said. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. Ethan, she looked at him directly. You have an apartment in London. You've been sleeping in your parents' guest room for 6 weeks. At some point, your real life calls you back. I've been moving my real life, he said. That's what I've been doing. I didn't want to say anything until it was more settled because I didn't want it to sound like a gesture, like I was telling you something to impress you rather than actually doing it. But I've been in conversations with the New York office for the past month. There's a managing director position opening in January. It's mine if I want it. She stared at him. My lease in London runs out in February, he said. I haven't renewed it. You didn't tell me any of this. No, he said. Why not? He looked at her steadily. Because I needed to figure out if I was doing it because of Noah, or because of me, or because of something else entirely. And I kept going around on that until I realized the answer isn't clean. It's all of those things. I want to be here for Noah. But I haven't been okay in London for a long time, Natalie. I've been building the right resume in the wrong life. And I was doing that before I saw you in that hallway. Coming back here just made me stop pretending I didn't know it. The kitchen was quiet around them. That's a lot to say, she said finally. I know. It doesn't fix anything between us, she said. I know that too. He turned his coffee mug on the table. I'm not trying to fast forward to the part where everything is healed. I know that's not how this works. She nodded slowly. She was looking at the table, working through something. He deserves to know who you are, she said. That's where I keep landing. Whatever happens between you and me, that's a separate thing and a slower thing, and I don't have a timeline for it. But Noah deserves to know his father. And it's been 6 weeks, and you're still here, and he already reaches for you, and keeping this from him is starting to feel... She stopped. It feels like we're doing something to him rather than for him. Yeah, Ethan said. I've been feeling that too. How do we even do that conversation? She said. He's 4. He's almost 5, Ethan said, which is different enough that it matters. He understands more than you'd expect, she admitted. He's been asking about fathers for about a year. Not in a desperate way, just processing. He sees kids at school with dads and he has questions. What does he ask? He asks why he doesn't have one. I've been saying that every family looks different, which is true, but it's the right answer for now, but it's not the whole truth. She looked at him. He asked me once if his dad didn't like him. Something in Ethan's expression shifted, not dramatically, just a slight change in the eyes, the kind that's hard to fake. God, he said quietly. He was asking from a very matter-of-fact place, Natalie said. He wasn't crying about it. He just wanted to know. I told him his dad didn't know about him yet, which was the truest simple version I could give him. He thought about that for a second and then said, "Oh, okay," and went back to his drawing. She paused. Kids can hold a lot if you give it to them straight. Sounds like you, Ethan said. She looked at him. He's going to have a lot of questions. I know. And some of them are going to be hard ones. For you. I know. He might not immediately... Natalie. His voice was quiet. I'm not expecting a perfect reaction. I'm not expecting anything. I just want to be honest with him. She was quiet for a long time. The apartment settled around them, a radiator clicking somewhere, the faint sound of the street through the window. Before Christmas, she said finally. I don't want him going into the holidays not knowing. That's my window. Ethan nodded. I'll talk to my therapist about how to frame it for his age. We'll do it together, the 3 of us. She looked at him, and then whatever happens, however he takes it, you have to stay. That's non-negotiable. If he gets upset or confused or he acts out about it, you don't get to find that hard and step back. You stay. I stay, Ethan said. She looked at him for a moment longer, measuring something she probably couldn't fully measure. Then she picked up her coffee mug. We should probably also figure out the practical stuff, she said, shifting slightly, like what you're telling him to call you. Ethan is fine, he said. For now, he can figure out the rest in his own time. She nodded. And then, because she was Natalie, and she processed things in layers that came out sideways when she wasn't braced for them, she said, "He drew a picture last week at preschool. The assignment was my family. He drew me and my parents and Dana and Noah himself." She stopped. And then one more figure that he told the teacher was his friend Ethan. Ethan didn't say anything. "His teacher mentioned it to me," Natalie said. She thought Ethan was a grandparent or an uncle. She looked at the table. She said he drew you taller than everyone else. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the city continued its patient noise. "He's been building his own picture of you," Natalie said, "in his head. He's been doing it for weeks. That's what 4-year-olds do. That they build the world they see and they put people in it." She finally looked up. "I just thought you should know that." Ethan sat with that for a moment, the full weight of it. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." They sat in the kitchen for a while longer after that, not saying much, the way two people can sit together when something significant has settled between them, and the silence is no longer awkward, but is instead the thing they're both living inside, turning over in their respective ways. When Ethan finally said goodnight and put his coat on, Noah's drawings were still on the refrigerator in the low kitchen light. Ethan glanced at them on his way out, not looking for a specific one, just looking, and Natalie didn't say anything, just held the door. He stepped out into the December hallway. She closed the door behind him and stood for a moment with her back against it, one hand still on the knob. From down the hall came Noah's voice, sleepy and slightly confused. "Mama, who was here?" "Ethan," she called back. A pause. "Oh," said Noah. Then, "Okay." She stood there a moment longer. Then she pushed off the door and went to check on her son. They told Noah on a Sunday. Natalie had talked to her therapist twice in the 2 weeks leading up to it, working through the language. What words a 4-year-old could hold. What words would slide past him without meaning, and what ones would stick in ways she couldn't predict. The therapist had said to keep it simple, to let him ask what he needed to ask, to not pre-answer questions he hadn't thought of yet. She had practiced it in the mirror at 6 in the morning while Noah slept. She had practiced it in the car. She had practiced it enough times that the words stopped feeling like words and started feeling like shapes she was moving around in her mouth. And she knew that was the point where you have to stop practicing and just do the thing. Ethan arrived at 10. He brought coffee for himself and Natalie and a small orange juice carton for Noah, which was such a specific and careful thing to remember that Natalie had to look away from him for a second when he came through the door. Noah was on the living room floor building something with blocks that had been gradually expanding all morning into a structure he described as a city but also a spaceship. He looked up when Ethan came in, said hi Ethan, and went back to his city spaceship without interrupting his concentration. They let him build for another 15 minutes. Then Natalie sat down on the floor beside him, not on the couch, not in the chair, on the floor, at his level. The way she'd learned was the right position for serious conversations with small people. Ethan sat on the floor too, on Noah's other side, which meant Noah was between them without it being staged. "Hey, bud," Natalie said. "Can you stop for a minute? I want to tell you something." Noah looked up. He read her face the way kids read their parents' faces, with the particular sensitivity of someone for whom that face is the primary weather system. "Is it bad?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's not bad. It's actually something really important." Noah put down the block he was holding. He looked at Ethan, then back at his mother. "Okay," he said. Natalie took a breath. "You know how you asked me once about your dad? About why you don't have one at home?" Noah nodded slowly. His expression was the careful, processing face. "I told you that your dad didn't know about you yet," she said. "Remember?" "Yeah," Noah said. "Well?" She paused. Just a half second, but Ethan felt it. "He knows now." Noah looked at her. Then he looked at Ethan, then back at Natalie. He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment Ethan's entire chest compressed into something very small and very still. "Is it Ethan?" Noah said. The simplicity of it, the way he said it, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a practical question, the way he'd ask if the thing in his cup was juice or water, undid something in Natalie that she hadn't known was holding. "Yes," she said.
Her voice was steady. Ethan is your dad. Noah looked at Ethan for a long time. Ethan looked back at him.
He had decided he wasn't going to be the one to speak first. This was Noah's thing to arrive at, in whatever direction he arrived at it. "You didn't know?" Noah said to Ethan. "No," Ethan said. "I didn't know. And I'm really sorry about that." Noah thought about this. "How come?" "It's complicated," Ethan said. "Grown-up stuff that wasn't fair to you. But I know now, and I'm not going anywhere." Another pause. Noah picked up the block he'd put down and turned it in his hands, not building with it, just holding it. "Marcus at school has a dad," he said. "His dad comes to pick up sometimes." "Yeah?" Ethan said. "He brings snacks," Noah said. "Usually the crackers with the cheese, the kind in the pack." "I can do that," Ethan said. Noah looked at him sideways. "You'd come to pick up?" "If that's okay with your mom, and with you." Noah considered this with the gravity of a city planning commissioner reviewing a proposal. "Okay," he said finally. He put the block back on his city spaceship. "Can we keep building now?" Natalie looked at Ethan over Noah's head. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was not going to cry, but was close to it and refusing it by pure concentration. "Yeah, bud," she said. "We can keep building." Dashad. It was not, of course, that simple. Nothing with children ever resolves in one clean scene the way you want it to. Over the next 2 weeks, Noah processed the information in the distributed, non-linear way. Children process large things, not all at once, but in pieces, at random angles, usually when you least expected it. He woke up at 2 a.m. 4 days later and appeared in Natalie's doorway saying he couldn't sleep, which he sometimes did when something was working through him. Natalie brought him to the couch, and they sat together under the blanket she kept there, and after about 10 minutes of quiet, he said, "Was Ethan sad he didn't know about me?" "Yes," Natalie said. "Very sad." Noah thought about this. "Was he mad?" "At himself, I think, more than anything." Another pause. "I wasn't mad," Noah said in the tone of someone who has decided to be generous about something. "Because he didn't know. You can't be mad at someone for not knowing." "That's really grown-up thinking," Natalie said. "Miss Chen says you have to have information before you decide things," Noah said. "About feelings." "Miss Chen is smart," Natalie said. "She has a plant on her desk that she talks to," Noah said. "She says it helps it grow." He looked at the ceiling. "Do you think that's actually true?" "I don't know," Natalie said honestly, "but I don't think it hurts." He went back to sleep 20 minutes later. Natalie sat in the dark living room for a while after he did. The question he'd asked, was Ethan sad? It wasn't the question she'd prepared for, which was the question about whether Ethan loved him, or why Ethan had been gone, or why she hadn't told him sooner. Those were the hard ones she'd braced for. What she hadn't prepared for was a 4-year-old deciding to think first about someone else's feelings. She sat with that for a long time. Bosik. Ethan came to pick up twice that first week. Both times he stood at the preschool gate with the other parents, hands in his jacket pockets, with the particular self-consciousness of a new person in an established social ecosystem. The other parents glanced at him with the mild curiosity of a community that knows its own. One of the fathers nodded at him. A woman named Beth, whose daughter was in Noah's class, introduced herself and asked if he was new, and Ethan said he was Noah's father, which was the first time he'd said it out loud to a stranger, and the word father landed in his mouth with a weight he hadn't anticipated. Noah came through the preschool doors in a group of kids, moving with the released energy of children freed from indoor requirements, spotted Ethan at the gate, and said, to no one in particular, to everyone, to the general air, "That's my dad." Not as an announcement, just as information. The same way he'd say, "That's the subway," or "That's our building." Ethan heard it. He kept his expression calm. He failed at this somewhat, but nobody was looking directly at him. In the evenings now, he sometimes read to Noah. It had started because Natalie had a work call that ran long on a Thursday night, and Noah wanted his book, and Ethan was there. And it had continued because Noah had specific requirements about how the deep-sea book was to be read. You had to do different voices for different creatures. The anglerfish needed to sound menacing. The blobfish needed to sound tired. And Ethan had apparently passed the audition.
Natalie would sometimes stand in the hallway outside Noah's room and listen, not intrusively, just listen. The sound of Ethan doing a tired blobfish voice, the sound of Noah correcting his intonation with serious authority. She didn't examine what it did to her. She just stood there a minute and then went back to whatever she'd been doing. December moved through them. Ethan signed the paperwork for the New York position in the third week of the month. He found an apartment in the West Village, not because it was optimal, but because it was available and he needed an address that was his own, and started moving the modest architecture of his life from London to New York in installments. His clothes first, his books, which he shipped in a box that arrived looking like it had experienced some personal drama. A guitar he'd owned since graduate school and never played enough, which he set in the corner of the new apartment and looked at with the complicated feeling of things you carry without knowing why. His father, recovered and mobile and deeply invested in everyone else's business, had of course found out about Noah within the first 2 weeks of the situation. James Carter had not said a great deal about it. What he'd said, when Ethan told him, was, "How old is he?" "4," Ethan said. "Almost 5." A silence. "What's he like?" Ethan thought about it. "Curious," he said. "Funny without trying to be. He's got your thing. The thing where you already know the answer, but you ask the question anyway." James Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You should bring him by." "I know, Dad." "Not eventually. Soon." "I know." His father had looked at him across the living room with the expression of a man who had things to say and was choosing carefully among them. "What you did 5 years ago," he started. "Dad, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm past that. I just want to say—" He stopped, tried again. "Your mother and I made mistakes too. Things we modeled for you about what it means to prioritize work. I know that. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend it came from nowhere." He looked at his hands. "But you're here now. That's what matters. You stay here." "I'm staying," Ethan said. "Good," his father said. And then with the slightly abrupt topic change of a man who has said as much as he knows how to, "Tell me about this apartment. Is there parking?" Christmas that year was smaller than usual. Natalie's parents came into the city from New Jersey. Her father Raymond, who had a booming laugh and strong opinions about the designated hitter rule, and her mother Sylvia, who had known Ethan 5 years ago in the context of her daughter's serious boyfriend, and was now confronted with him in a context that had no established category. Sylvia was civil. She was warm with Noah, which was her priority and always had been, and she was measured with Ethan in the way of a woman who is withholding judgment she has already privately formed until she has more evidence. Raymond shook Ethan's hand on arrival and said, "So you're back." It wasn't quite hostile, it wasn't quite welcoming. It was the handshake of a father who is choosing to see what happens next. Noah got a telescope for Christmas, from Ethan, which had been cleared with Natalie in advance. It was calibrated for children, simple, sturdy, with a guide to stars visible from the northern hemisphere. And Noah opened it with the sustained, concentrated excitement of a child who has been given something he didn't know he wanted until it was in front of him. "Can we look at the moon?" he asked immediately. "We have to wait until it's dark," Ethan said. Noah looked at the window where afternoon light was still coming through and made a sound of extreme impatience. "It'll be dark by dinner," Natalie said. "Will it be dark by dessert?" Noah asked. "Yes," Raymond said, already delighted by his grandson in the way grandfathers always are. "It will definitely be dark by dessert." After dark. After dinner and dessert, and Noah's extremely thorough demands regarding the pecan pie portion sizes. They set the telescope up on Natalie's small balcony, all of them in coats, Noah in his orange puffer and a wool hat Sylvia had pulled over his ears. Ethan crouched beside him and showed him how to find the moon in the viewfinder, adjusting the angle with small movements until Noah made a noise that wasn't quite a word, more of a sudden exhale, high and surprised. "I can see it," Noah said. "I can see the bumpy parts." "Those are craters," Ethan said. "From what?" "Rocks from space hitting the surface, a long time ago." "Are there still rocks coming?" "Sometimes. Smaller ones, mostly." Noah kept his eye pressed to the viewfinder, both small hands gripping the tube of the telescope. Behind them on the balcony, Natalie stood with her arms crossed against the cold, watching them. Her mother appeared beside her, also watching. Sylvia said quietly. Mom, Natalie said. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was going to say he's good with him, Sylvia said. That's all I was going to say. Natalie looked at them, at her son with both hands on his telescope, and at Ethan crouched beside him explaining craters with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. Yeah, she said. He is. How are you? Her mother asked. Not about Noah, about her. I don't know yet, Natalie said honestly.
Sylvia put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. They stood there in the cold, watching. The new year arrived the way New Year's do, with a lot of feeling assigned to a date that is in practice just a Tuesday. Ethan was in the West Village apartment on New Year's Eve, on the phone with Noah, who had been allowed to stay up until 9 and was using his remaining waking time to update Ethan on what the moon looked like through the telescope from the window. Natalie was somewhere in the background of the call. Ethan could hear her telling Noah to keep the window closed because it was cold. It looks smaller than last time, Noah reported. The moon goes through phases, Ethan said. Sometimes it's full and big and sometimes it's smaller. It depends on where it is relative to the sun. Where is it now? I'd have to check. We can look it up next time. Okay? A pause. Ethan?
Yeah? Happy New Year, Noah said with the solemnity of someone wishing you something important. Happy New Year, Noah. Are you going to come over tomorrow? If your mom says it's okay. A muffled exchange in the background. Then Noah came back. She says it's okay if you bring the good bagels, the ones with the seeds. Everything bagels, Ethan said. Everything bagels, Noah confirmed. Everything ones. Done, Ethan said.
He sat in his new apartment after the call, in the particular silence of a New Year's Eve when you are alone and okay with it, which is a different kind of alone from the other kind. He thought about where he'd been a year ago, London, a work function he'd attended and left early, the usual sense of performing a life that fit him like a suit 2 sizes slightly wrong. He thought about a boy who wished him Happy New Year with the seriousness of a diplomat. January moved into February.
The managing director position started, and Ethan came back to his apartment, at more human hours than he'd kept in London, which surprised him by being easy. He didn't miss the late nights. He hadn't missed them for a long time. He'd just mistaken the habit for the necessity.
He was at the hospital for Noah's preschool graduation in February, a thing that involved construction paper hats and a song about the months of the year sung in a register that tested the structural integrity of the event space. Natalie sat beside him in the 3rd row. They were not together, but they were there together, which was its own category that didn't have a clean name yet. Noah spotted them from the stage and waved with the full-body enthusiasm of a child who has not yet learned the restraint of casual acknowledgement. They both waved back. Ethan looked at Natalie. Natalie looked at him. Don't say anything, she said quietly. I wasn't going to say anything, he said. You had a face. I always have a face. She looked back at the stage where Noah was now waving at someone else with equal enthusiasm, already moved on. You're getting better at this, she said. The dad thing. I had good material to work with, he said. She was quiet for a second. That might be the first time you've said something like that, and I didn't immediately check it for angles. He looked at her. What does that mean? It means I'm starting to believe you, she said. She said it the way she said hard things, without drama, just directly. Not about everything, not yet, but about this part, about him. He nodded. He didn't push it. He understood that belief, with her, wasn't going to arrive all at once. It was going to come in pieces, like light through a window that you open a bit at a time, and you don't rush the window because you know what cold feels like, and you're being careful. On stage, Noah's class had launched into the Months of the Year song, which Noah was singing with great commitment and approximately 60% accuracy. The letter from the London Institute of Pediatric Research arrived at Natalie's office on a Wednesday in late February. She read it twice at her desk before she read it again. Then she put it down and looked at the wall for a while. It was the position she'd applied to 2 years ago, on a night when she was tired and slightly defiant about her career trajectory, filling out the application mostly as an exercise in knowing she could. She'd interviewed by video call 8 months later, liked the people, told herself she had no realistic chance, and more or less forgotten about it. The letter said she had a realistic chance. More than that. The letter said they wanted her. Chief of Pediatric Oncology Research. A newly funded department, substantial resources. A team of 12. The chance to shape a research program from the ground up in a way she was not going to get at Meridian General for at least another decade. It was, professionally, everything. It was in London. She sat with the letter for the rest of the afternoon. She did not call Dana. She did not call her mother. She did not call Ethan. She sat with it alone because she needed to know what she felt about it before she knew what she thought about it, and those were two different processes that required different amounts of quiet. What she felt, in the order that the feelings arrived: excitement, which surprised her by its immediacy, then guilt, which did not surprise her, then something that was almost grief, preemptive and complicated, then a kind of anger at the timing that was irrational and also completely rational, then underneath all of it, the things she'd been carrying for 2 years and hadn't named clearly until right now. The knowledge that she had built something good here, in this city, with her son, and that the building of it had required her to put her own ambitions in a smaller room, and that she had done that willingly and without regret, and also with a small constant grief she'd gotten good at not looking directly at. She told Ethan the following Sunday. Noah was napping, a rare occurrence at almost 5, but he'd had a big Saturday and went down at 2 without protest. They were in the kitchen, which had become the room where real conversations happened, maybe because it was small enough to feel contained. She slid the letter across the table to him. He read it. She watched his face while he did. He was careful about his expression, which told her he understood the weight of it immediately. When he finished reading, he set it down. "Congratulations," he said. "I haven't decided anything," she said. "I know, but it's still a congratulations situation." He looked at her. "How long have you known about this position?" "I applied 2 years ago. Forgot about it mostly." She folded her hands on the table. "The timing is bad," he said. "Yes." "Or maybe not," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the letter. "London," he said, mostly to himself. Then he looked up at her. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the calculation, what you'd be taking Noah away from, what you'd be giving up here, whether asking him to move is too much disruption after everything that's just stabilized." He paused. "And you're thinking about me." "You're his father," she said. "Of course I'm thinking about you." "You should take it," he said. "Ethan, I mean it." He said it evenly, not with bravado, not as a performance. "This is your field. This is what you're supposed to be doing. You built everything here on half the oxygen you should have had, working around the constraints of being alone. And now someone is handing you the full thing, and you shouldn't not take it because of me." "It's not just about you," she said. "It's about Noah's stability, his school, his friends, the life we built." "He's 4, Ethan said. "Kids adapt." "I know you know that." "He just found you," she said. And there it was, the thing at the center of all of it. 6 weeks ago he found out you exist, and now I'm supposed to tell him we're moving to a different country? Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What if you didn't?" he said. She stared at him. What if it wasn't a choice between London and me? He was working through something as he spoke, not a prepared speech, just thinking out loud in real time. "What if I came with you?" The kitchen was very still. "I have a job here," he said. "I've had it for 8 weeks. I can unhave it. I work in finance, and there's no city in the world that doesn't have finance. I can find something in London." He paused. "Or I cannot find something immediately, and that's also fine. My financial situation is—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I have runway. I'm not worried about money. I can figure out London." "You can't uproot your life because I got a letter," Natalie said. "I uprooted my life 2 months ago because I saw my son through a hospital hallway window," he said. "I'm not afraid of uprooting things anymore. I got over that." She was looking at him the way she'd looked at him in the hospital hallway the first day, carefully, measuring something she couldn't entirely measure. "I need you to understand," she said slowly, "that this isn't me saying yes to London isn't me saying yes to anything else. Between us, we're still whatever we are, which is, I know what we are," he said. "Do you?" We're two people trying to do right by our son, who have a lot of history and a lot of unresolved. He stopped. I'm not asking you to resolve anything tonight. I'm asking you to take the job you want. The rest of it, he looked at the table. The rest of it can figure itself out in its own time. Natalie looked at him for a long moment, then at the letter, then at the window where the February afternoon light was doing its pale, clear thing. You'd move to London, she said, not quite a question. For Noah, he said, and not for you. He said the second part with the careful honesty of someone who has decided to stop editing themselves quite so aggressively. That's just true. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. She was quiet. Think about it, he said. You don't have to decide anything right now. I know, she said, but she was already reading the letter again. She didn't give him an answer that night or the next day. She gave him an answer on a Thursday evening, standing in the hallway of her apartment while Noah was in the other room doing something involving his telescope and a lot of narration directed at nobody in particular. I'm going to call them back, she said. The Institute. I'm going to tell them I'm interested. Ethan looked at her. But I need to know, before I do any of that, I need to know that you've actually thought about this. Not the version where you're being the good person and making the right choice because you're trying to prove something. The real version. The real version, he said, is that London is where I went when I was running away from something. Going back would be the first time I've gone towards something instead. She looked at him for a long time. Noah can't know yet, she said. Not until it's more settled. He's got enough to absorb. Agreed. And I'm not promising anything about us, whatever that is. I can't make that promise right now. I'm not asking you to. She nodded once. She started to turn back toward the room where Noah was. Then she stopped. For what it's worth, she said, without looking at him, in the voice she used when she was admitting something against her own better judgment. The fact that you offered, that you said it first before I asked, that's not nothing. He didn't say anything. She went back to the room with the telescope. From where he stood in the hallway, Ethan could hear Noah explaining something to himself about Jupiter, its position, its size, the number of moons it had, in the confident, slightly breathless voice of someone delivering a lecture they find genuinely exciting. He stood there and listened until Noah wound down to a pause, and then he walked toward the light. Natalie called the London Institute on a Friday morning from her office with the door closed. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. She'd expected to feel something decisive when she hung up, relief or dread, or the clean sensation of a door opening or closing. Instead, she felt the particular flatness that follows a significant action, the way your body sometimes refuses to produce the emotion the moment seems to require and just sits there, processing. She had told them she was interested, but needed 30 days before giving a formal answer. They had said 30 days was acceptable. She had thanked them and set the phone down and looked at the wall of her office for a while, at the framed photograph of Noah at age 2 standing in a pile of autumn leaves looking startled by his own happiness. And she had thought, everything I decide from here reorganizes around this. She didn't tell Ethan she'd made the call. Not immediately. She told Dana first because Dana was the person she processed things with before she was ready to discuss them with people who had stakes in the outcome. Dana took it with the characteristic blend of enthusiasm and skepticism that made her useful. So you called them, she said. That's the call you make when you're going to say yes. Or the call you make when you need to know the door is still open, Natalie said. Those are the same call. They're not. Natalie. Dana said her name the way she said it when she thought Natalie was performing complexity for its own sake. What do you actually want? Not what's responsible, not what makes sense. What do you want? Natalie was quiet for a moment. I want to run that department, she said. I want to build something that's actually mine from the beginning. I'm good at what I do here, but I've been good at what I do here for 4 years, and I'm starting to feel like... She stopped. Like I've been maintaining something instead of building something. Then you already know, Dana said. Noah has 2 parents now. That's a new variable. Use it. Natalie absorbed this. You make it sound simple. No, Dana said. I make it sound like a decision, which it is. Simple is different.
She told Ethan on a Sunday. Noah was at her parents' place in New Jersey for the weekend, a monthly thing that Raymond had established with the cheerful irresistibility of a grandfather who knows what he wants and simply assumes it will happen. It was the first time Natalie and Ethan had been in her apartment without Noah present, which produced a different quality of space, more room in the air for things they'd been keeping in the background. She told him about the call.
He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she'd noticed he'd gotten better at, the listening, the not filling silence with his own response before she'd finished. 30 days, he said when she was done. Yes. That's enough time to figure out the logistics. It's enough time to figure out if we should figure out the logistics, she said, which is the prior question. He nodded. He was sitting at this kitchen table with his hands around a coffee mug, and he looked at her with the steadiness that had gradually replaced the performance of steadiness she'd been watching for the seams in. Somewhere over the past 2 months, the seams had stopped being visible, and she'd had to adjust to what that meant. I want to be honest about something, she said. Okay. Part of why I'm slow on this isn't about Noah or the job or London. Part of it is about you and me, and what it means to move to a city with you when we're not. She stopped organizing. We've been doing this very careful dance where we're in each other's lives constantly, and we never name what that is. And I've been fine with that because I haven't been ready to name it. But if we're talking about moving to London together, we wouldn't be moving together, he said. I'd be moving at the same time you moved. That's different.
Is it? He was quiet for a moment. What are you asking me? I'm asking you what you want, she said. Not what you're willing to do for Noah. What you want. He set his coffee mug down. He looked at the table for a second and then back at her with the expression of someone who has already decided what they're going to say and is just choosing the right entry point. I want us, he said. That's the honest answer.
I've wanted it since I walked back into this city, and I've been careful not to push it, because I understood that wanting something doesn't entitle you to it, and that you needed time and space to arrive wherever you were going to arrive. He paused. But you're asking me directly, so I'm telling you directly. I want us. I want the thing we had before I made the mistake of leaving it, except better, because we're different people now, and we know more about what it costs to get things wrong.
Natalie looked at him.
I'm not saying that to pressure you, he said. I know it doesn't change your timeline. I know you have to get there in your own way. But you asked what I wanted, and I'm done being strategic about the answer. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, March was doing its reluctant thing. Not quite winter, not quite anything else. The sky the color of unresolved weather. I'm not there yet, she said finally. I want to be honest about that. I know.
But She stopped, started again. I'm closer than I was. He nodded once. He didn't push it further. That restraint was part of what was closing the distance, and they both understood that without saying it. Tell me about the London position, he said. The actual work.
What would you be building? And so she told him about the research program, the team structure, the specific questions she'd been circling in pediatric oncology for years that this department would finally have the resources to pursue. She talked for almost 40 minutes, which was longer than she'd talked about her own work to another person in years. And he asked good questions that were the questions of someone paying attention rather than waiting for his turn to speak. By the time she stopped, the coffee was cold, and the light in the kitchen had shifted to the lower gold of late afternoon. You should do it, he said. You've said that. I'm saying it again because you've been talking about it for 40 minutes, and your face looked different the whole time, less managed. She considered that. Is my face usually managed? Yes, he said, not in a bad way. You're just very careful about what you let out. It's a thing you do. He picked up his cold coffee, thought better of it, put it down. When you were talking about the research just now, you weren't doing it. She looked at the table. Dana says the same thing. Dana is observant. Dana is borderline intrusive, Natalie said, but without real objection. She started to reach for her own mug, and her hand crossed near his on the table, not quite touching, and neither of them moved away from the proximity. Just sat there with the small charged geography of it. I need to tell Noah, she said. I know. About potentially moving. About all of it. She looked at her hand near his on the table. He's been doing so well. The school stuff, the adjustment to knowing who you are. I don't want to put more change on him before he's got this part solid. Kids build solid faster than we think, Ethan said, especially when the people around them are stable. He's been watching us be stable together. That's the thing he's actually building on.
You sound like my therapist. Your therapist sounds smart. She charges $160 an hour, so she'd better. He smiled. A real one. Not the careful, managed version she'd been seeing early on. We'll tell him together, he said, like we did the first time. Natalie moved her hand slightly on the table. Her fingers came to rest beside his, not overlapping, just beside. Together, she said. Neither of them said anything else for a minute.
It was, in its way, the conversation they'd been having around the edges of for 3 months, finally arriving at its actual center. Not resolved. Nothing was fully resolved yet, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but arrived at. Acknowledged. Set on the table with the rest of it to be dealt with in the daylight rather than managed around the sides. They told Noah about London on a Saturday morning in mid-March, 1 week after his 5th birthday. The birthday had been its own thing. A small party at the apartment, 6 kids from preschool, a dinosaur cake that Natalie had attempted from a recipe, and that Ethan had quietly supplemented with a bakery backup in case the recipe went wrong, which it had, slightly, in a way that everyone was very diplomatic about. Noah had blown out his candles with the focused intent of someone who had a specific wish and needed the aerodynamics to cooperate. And when Ethan asked what he wished for, Noah said he couldn't tell because then it wouldn't come true, which was technically true, but also convenient. Ethan's parents had come. James Carter, 8 weeks out from his procedure and significantly less tolerant of dietary restrictions than his cardiologist would have preferred, had shaken Noah's hand at the door with the formality of an introduction that mattered to him. Noah had shaken back with equal seriousness and then offered James a piece of the slightly lopsided cake, which James accepted with the expression of a man who has been given something he wasn't expecting to want and finds he wants it very much. Margaret Carter had sat beside Natalie during the party with the composed, watchful manner she brought to everything, and at one point had said quietly, "Thank you for letting us be part of this." Natalie had said something like, "Of course," but what she'd heard underneath Margaret's words was the thing Margaret wasn't saying, which was that she understood what Natalie had carried alone and was not going to minimize it by pretending the thank you covered it. It was the most Margaret had ever said to her about any of it. It was also enough. The Saturday after the birthday, Noah was on the living room floor with the aftermath of his presence. The telescope was getting a lot of use, and someone had given him a detailed illustrated book about the solar system that he'd become devoted to with the intensity he brought to things that genuinely interested him. He was lying on his stomach reading it, or looking at it with the focused attention that was his version of reading, when Natalie and Ethan sat down near him. He looked up, read the room the way he read rooms, quickly, accurately. "Is this another important talk?" he asked. "Yeah," Natalie said, "but a good one." "Okay." He sat up, crossing his legs, and gave them his full attention in the way he'd been taught to do for important conversations. His face was open, watchful. "You know how I have my job at the hospital?" Natalie said. "The sick kids," Noah said. "Yes, well, there's a different hospital, a very important one, in another city. They want me to come and be in charge of helping even more sick kids." She paused. "It's a really big job, a really good one." Noah thought about this. "Where is it?" "A city called London," Natalie said. "In England." Noah's brow furrowed. "That's far." "It is far. It's across the ocean." He looked at Ethan. "Are you going?" Ethan met his gaze. "I'm thinking about it. What do you think about that?" Noah appeared to turn this over with some care. "You just got here," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "If you go to London and we don't go, then you'll be far again." "That's right," Ethan said. "So I was thinking, if you and your mom go to London, maybe I would go too, so we could all be in the same city." Noah looked at his mother. "Would we come back?" "Yes," Natalie said. "This would still be our home. We'd be in London for a while, maybe a few years, and then we'd come back." "What about our apartment?" We'd figure that out. What about the telescope? It's too big to carry on the plane. We'd ship it, Ethan said, in a special box, and it would meet us there. Noah appeared to find this logistically satisfactory. He looked at his solar system book, then up at the ceiling with the expression he got when he was working through something. Is London near space? He asked finally. Ethan kept his expression neutral with some effort. No more than here. Oh, he considered. Does it have a botanic garden? It has several, actually, Natalie said. Really famous ones. This landed as relevant information. Are there greenhouse parts? Very good ones. Noah nodded slowly. He looked between his parents. He'd been calling Ethan Dad for about 3 weeks now, in the offhand way he'd adopted everything about Ethan, without ceremony, with the expression of someone rendering a judgment. Okay, he said, but I want to be the one to tell Marcus. He thinks his dad's job is cooler because of the truck, but moving to London is definitely cooler than a truck. Agreed, Ethan said. Noah went back to his solar system book. The conversation was, apparently, complete. Natalie looked at Ethan. She was doing the thing she did now more often, looking at him without immediately looking away, without the guardedness that had defined the early months. He looked back at her. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. The 30 days became 6 weeks of logistics that Natalie handled with the systematic efficiency she applied to complex problems, which was the same efficiency she'd applied to every difficult thing in her life for the past 5 years, and which, Ethan noticed, she was slightly better at now than she had been before she'd had to do everything alone. Hardship produces specific competencies. Natalie had gotten very good at figuring things out. She gave the London Institute her formal yes on a Thursday afternoon in April. She told Ethan by text 3 words, said yes, called them. He sent back proud of you. She looked at those 3 words for a moment longer than the moment required. Ethan told the New York office he'd be leaving the managing director position at the end of June. His boss, a pragmatic woman named Carol, who had seen enough of life to understand that people sometimes reorganize around things more important than quarterly returns, said she was sorry to lose him and meant it, and also immediately began working on coverage, which was its own kind of respect. He started reaching out to contacts in London's financial sector and found that 5 years of work there had left enough of a network that the question wasn't whether something would materialize, but what shape it would take. The West Village apartment he'd rented for 4 months was sublet to a graduate student who needed a summer place. Ethan moved his things into storage, most of them, and spent May and June living out of a suitcase with comfortable looseness, as if the physical lightness matched something he was allowing himself to feel. He spent most evenings at Natalie's apartment, putting Noah to bed, reading the deep sea book or the solar system book, depending on Noah's mood, sometimes just sitting on the floor of Noah's room after the light was out, while Noah chased the last edges of wakefulness with questions. Noah's questions at bedtime had a particular quality. They were the questions he'd been saving all day, the ones that didn't fit anywhere else. Some were practical, some were philosophical, some were both at the same time in the way that only children manage. One night in May, in the dark of his room, Noah said, "Dad?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Why do people go away from each other?" Ethan sat with that for a moment. "Sometimes because they think they should be somewhere else," he said carefully. "And sometimes because they're scared." "Were you scared? When I left?" "Yeah, I think so. Not in the way you'd recognize as scared. More like I was scared of something and I turned it into a plan instead of looking at it directly." Noah was quiet. "I'm scared of spiders," he said, "but I look at them." "That's actually very brave," Ethan said. "Mama says knowing what you're afraid of is better than not knowing, because then you know where the scary thing is." "Your mama is usually right about things like that," Ethan said. "I know," Noah said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who had been observing this for his entire life. "She's right about most stuff." A pause. "She's wrong about the blobfish." "What does she say about the blobfish?" "She says it doesn't actually look like a sad face. It only looks like that because of the water pressure thing." He said water pressure thing with the precision of a child who has learned specific vocabulary. "But I think it looks like a sad face even without the water pressure." "I think it does too," Ethan said.
That's 2 against 1, Noah said, satisfied. He was asleep within 10 minutes.
He slept the way he did everything, directly, without complication, giving the thing his full presence until it was done. Ethan sat in the dark room for a few minutes after Noah's breathing evened out. He had a recurring thing that happened in these moments, a kind of grief that ran alongside the gratitude, the two feelings existing simultaneously in a way he'd initially tried to separate and then stopped trying to separate. The grief was for the years he hadn't been in this room. The gratitude was for the fact that he was in it now. Both were real. Neither canceled the other out. He'd come to understand that was just what it felt like to be someone who had come back to something instead of arriving at it from the beginning. He went out to the kitchen where Natalie was sitting at the table with a research paper she was reading for the London transition and a cup of tea she'd made herself and hadn't drunk. "Asleep?" she said, without looking up. "About 10 minutes ago, after a detailed argument about the blobfish." "The blobfish has an entire opinions-generating infrastructure in his brain," Natalie said. "I've been fighting that battle for 2 years." "He's right, though," Ethan said. "It does look sad." She looked up. "Not you too. I'm just saying, it's a deep-sea pressure phenomenon. It's not—" She stopped, looked at his expression. "You're doing the thing he does," she said. "You already know, and you're pretending you don't." "I genuinely believe the blobfish looks sad," Ethan said. "That's independent of the water pressure." She shook her head, but she was almost smiling, and the almost smile had been happening more often in the past month in a way that Ethan tracked without making a thing of it. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make you tea. You haven't drunk yours." "I know. I always make it, and then forget about it. It's a bad habit." She got up and moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone in a space they know well, and he sat at the table and watched the familiar geography of her. The particular way she moved, the way she stood while waiting for things to heat, the way her hands were always doing something slightly purposeful, even at rest. He had missed these things for 5 years while convincing himself he hadn't. She set a mug in front of him and sat back down with hers. They sat across from each other in the low kitchen light with the sounds of the apartment at night around them. "I got a call today," she said, "from Meridian General's chief of medicine." He looked at her. He'd heard I was leaving. He wanted to know if there was any possibility of— He was asking about a different arrangement, a more senior position, more research latitude, structural changes to the department. She turned her mug on the table. "It was the call I would have wanted 18 months ago." "But not now," Ethan said. "But not now," she agreed. I turned it down. Politely, but clearly. She looked at the table. And I felt completely fine about it, which surprised me. I thought I'd second-guess it, but I just felt— She shook her head slightly, like I was moving toward something instead of settling for what was already there. "You said something like that before," Ethan said. "Maintaining versus building." "You remembered that." "I remember most things you say," he said. Then, because that landed slightly more weighted than he'd intended. "You're precise. It sticks." She looked at him with a quiet expression that he couldn't fully read, but that wasn't uncomfortable. "I'm going to miss this apartment," she said. "I know. I'm going to miss Dana, my parents." She looked at the window. I built this life here alone, and it's mine. And leaving it even for something good still feels like letting go of something I worked hard for." "You're not leaving it," he said. "You're adding to it. You'll come back to it. It won't be the same when we come back." "No," he said. "Probably better." She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and fond, a combination he'd noticed her arriving at more often in recent weeks. "You're an optimist," she said. "I didn't used to think of you that way." "What did you think of me?" She considered. "Ambitious, driven, good at the beginning of things." She paused. "I think I'm revising some of that." "Just some?" "Don't push it," she said, but she was definitely almost smiling. He drank his tea. She drank hers, for once, before it went cold. June arrived with the particular energy that comes before major change. Everything simultaneously ordinary and charged. The familiar things more noticeable because they're about to become less available. Natalie packed the apartment in the systematic way she did necessary things that she didn't want to think too hard about. Noah supervised and occasionally contributed by putting things in boxes that didn't need to be in boxes. They flew out on a Sunday at the end of June. James and Margaret Carter came to the airport, which Ethan had told them wasn't necessary, and which they had ignored with the comfortable certainty of parents who have learned that being told something isn't necessary is not equivalent to being told not to come. At the gate, James crouched down to Noah's level, stiffly, with the deliberate caution of a man 8 months out from a cardiac procedure who is not going to let that stop him, and said, "You're going to like London. There's a lot to look at." "Are there blobfish?" Noah asked. James blinked. Probably not locally, no. But there's ocean near London?" "Yes." "Then statistically," Noah said, "there could be." James looked up at Ethan over Noah's head with an expression of pure delight that he didn't try to moderate. "He does the thing," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "He does the thing." Margaret hugged Natalie at the gate in the careful way of women who have not resolved everything between them, but have decided that some things are more important than resolution. Natalie hugged back with the warmth of someone who understood what was being offered and accepted it for what it was. On the plane, Noah took the window seat because it was non-negotiable. Natalie was in the middle. Ethan was on the aisle. Noah pressed his face to the window as they taxied and reported on everything he could see until the runway lights became a blur, and then the dark bowl of the sky swallowed them. "We're above the clouds," Noah said in a voice that had gone quiet and slightly awed. "Yes," Natalie said. "Can you see any stars?" She leaned across to look. "A few." "Which ones?" "I don't know their names from this angle," she said. "You'll have to ask your dad." Noah turned from the window and looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the dark sky and the scatter of stars visible above the cloud layer and said, "That bright one is probably Jupiter." "Probably," Noah said. "Fairly definitely." "You should know for sure," Noah said. "You told me you'd learn them." "I'm working on it," Ethan said. "Work faster," Noah said, and turned back to the window. Natalie looked at Ethan. He looked at her. The expression on her face was not quite a smile, but was the thing that sometimes comes before a smile when a person is doing their best not to have one yet. He reached over in the dark of the cabin and put his hand over hers on the armrest. Gently. Not claiming anything, not asking anything, just putting it there. She looked down at their hands. Then she turned hers over so their palms were together, fingers loose. She didn't say anything, neither did he. Outside the window, Noah was narrating something about the cloud formations below them, in the low, intent voice he used when he was certain of his audience, which he always was, because his audience was always there, looking at what he pointed to, staying with him as the lights of the city they'd left fell away behind them, and the Atlantic stretched out dark and wide ahead. They crossed it together. London in July is not what people expect. Most people carry a picture of it assembled from films and photographs. Gray skies, rain, the specific melancholy of a city that has been standing long enough to have opinions about weather. What they don't expect is the light. In July, London gets a quality of afternoon light that comes in low and gold and stays for hours, the kind of light that makes even ordinary streets look like they mean something. Noah noticed it the second day. He stood at the window of the furnished flat they'd rented in Islington and said, "The sun is in the wrong place," with the tone of a scientist registering an anomaly, and Ethan explained about latitude and the angle of light at different distances from the equator, and Noah listened with his head tilted slightly, filing it. The flat was on the 3rd floor of a Georgian building with tall windows and radiators that clanked in a way that would have been annoying if it hadn't also been, somehow, charming. Natalie had found it through the Institute's relocation service. 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking, a sitting room with bookshelves that came with the place and that Noah immediately claimed as a display space for his solar system book and the small collection of rocks he'd been accumulating for 6 months. There was a park 2 streets over. There was a bakery on the corner that made something called a Chelsea bun that Noah declared superior to all other baked goods within 48 hours of arrival, a position he held with evangelical certainty. The first weeks were the particular chaos of a new place before it becomes familiar. The wrong turns, the unfamiliar sounds at night, the slightly disorienting experience of a city that runs on its own internal logic and doesn't explain itself to you.
Noah adapted with the speed of a child for whom newness is not yet a threat. He cataloged things. He had opinions about the double-decker buses and the underground and the specific way British pigeons behave differently from American pigeons, a distinction he'd made within 4 days and could not be talked out of. He started a new school in September, a small primary school near the flat, and came home the first day with the information that his teacher was called Miss Hargreaves and had a plant on her desk. Just like Miss Chen, Noah said. Does she talk to it? Ethan asked. I didn't ask yet, Noah said. I'll find out. He found out on Wednesday. Miss Hargreaves did in fact talk to her plant. Noah reported this with the satisfaction of a researcher whose hypothesis has been confirmed. I think that's a teacher thing, he said seriously, not a Miss Chen thing specifically. A broader pattern, Ethan agreed. Exactly, Noah said. Natalie started at the London Institute of Pediatric Research on the first Monday of August, 6 weeks after they'd landed. The department was not what she'd imagined. It was both smaller and more complex than the letter had suggested, the way new jobs always are. The gap between the description and the reality being the territory you spend the first months learning to navigate. The team of 12 was actually 14, 2 of whom were in conflict with each other in the quiet, entrenched way of academic professionals who have been feuding for long enough that neither of them fully remembers the original cause. The research program was further along than she'd been told in some areas and significantly behind in others. The budget had a discrepancy she found in the second week that took 3 weeks to untangle. She came home on bad days looking the way people look when they've been solving problems for 10 hours with their thinking brain while the rest of them just had to wait, drained in a specific horizontal way, the kind that sleep helps but doesn't entirely fix. Ethan had dinner ready on those nights, or had collected something from the place on the high street they'd found early and kept returning to. He didn't ask how it went unless she brought it up. He had learned, was still learning, the difference between support that helps and support that just adds another thing to manage. She brought it up, usually, after Noah was in bed. Those kitchen conversations had followed them across the ocean and settled into the Islington flat as naturally as their own furniture. She'd talk through what was difficult, the personnel problem, the budget question, the specific texture of trying to establish authority in a new institution with its own decades of hierarchy. And he'd listen and occasionally say things that were useful and occasionally say things that were wrong, and she'd tell him when he was wrong, and neither of those things disrupted the equilibrium of the conversation. That was new. 5 years ago, they hadn't known how to disagree without one of them going quiet in a way that closed things off. Now they could be wrong at each other and stay in the room. The team is starting to trust me, she said one night in October, 3 months in. Not all of them, but most. There's a researcher, Dr. Okafor. She's been there 8 years. She came to me today with something she'd been sitting on for months. Just showed up at my office door and said she'd been waiting for someone she thought would actually read it. And did you? Ethan said. I read it that afternoon. It's good. Better than good. She's been working on a targeting mechanism for resistant neuroblastoma that the previous department head kept deprioritizing because it wasn't flashy enough. Natalie shook her head, still slightly indignant about it. Flashy. Like that's the metric. What are you going to do with it? Restructure the Q1 research calendar to give her proper lab time and resources. She said it the way she said things she was certain about. She looked at me like she was waiting for a catch. There wasn't one. He watched her while she talked. She'd changed in the months since London, not fundamentally, but there was something fuller about her, some quality of occupation that had been slightly rationed before and was now running at capacity. She was doing what she was supposed to be doing at the scale she was supposed to be doing it, and it showed in the way someone shows when they've finally been given enough room. He told her that once, straight out, because he'd gotten better at saying things directly instead of carrying them around. You look different here, he said, than you did in New York. She looked at him. Different how? Like there's more of you, he said. That's the best I can do language-wise. She was quiet for a moment. I feel that, she said. I feel like I fit here in a way I didn't know I wasn't fitting before. She paused. I was good at New York, but I was also compensating, all the time. For the things I didn't have, professionally, personally, I was very good at building workarounds. She looked at her hands. Here I don't have to compensate as much. For the professional part, he said. Yes. A pause. For other things, too.
She looked at him with the direct gaze she'd been bringing more often, the one that didn't deflect or redirect. You know what's strange? I think about that night in New York sometimes, the night I found out I was pregnant, sitting on the bathroom floor, and I don't feel angry about it anymore, not the way I did for a long time. What do you feel? He asked. I think everything that happened after that made me someone I actually like. She said it carefully, not performing insight, just reporting it honestly. Not because of the suffering. I'm not being romantic about suffering. I just mean I built something real out of something that could have broken me. And I know I can do that now. I know that about myself. She looked at the kitchen window, the London night outside it. I couldn't have known it without the hard part. He nodded. He understood something parallel in himself. The version of him that had left New York at 29 would not have been capable of what had been required of him this year. You don't get the capacity without the experience that builds it, and the experience is usually the part that hurts. I'm sorry, he said, for being the hard part. You were a hard part, she said. Not the only one. She looked back at him. And you've been a different part since. I've been watching. I don't think you know how much I've been watching. I know you've been watching, he said. And I hope what you've seen is someone worth watching, he said simply. She held his gaze for a moment, then she stood up and took her mug to the sink, and as she passed behind his chair, her hand came to rest briefly on his shoulder, light, deliberate, present, and then lifted, and she went on. It was not a small thing. He sat with it after she'd gone to bed, the particular warmth of a gesture that was not accidental. Bets. Noah turned 6 in March of the following year. By then, he'd been at his London school long enough to have established a social order. He had 3 close friends, a running argument with a boy named Oliver about whether sharks or crocodiles would win a fight, a teacher he liked, and a lunch table he'd apparently staked out with some firmness in the early weeks. He joined an astronomy club that met after school on Tuesdays, run by a parent volunteer who had a telescope better than Noah's, and who Noah had assessed and approved. He'd also discovered Chelsea buns were available in a specific shop 2 stops down on the tube, information he treated as geographically important. He was, in the understated way that children often are, doing fine. The birthday party that year was bigger than the previous one. London friends, some of his preschool friends from New York, whose families happened to be visiting, James and Margaret, who had flown over because there was no version of events in which James Carter was going to miss his grandson's birthday, and they all knew it. Dana came because Dana arranged her life with the unsentimental practicality of someone who has decided that important things are worth the flight, and she arrived bearing a gift that was aggressively age-appropriate and an expression of assessment that she applied to Ethan within the first 20 minutes and declared privately to Natalie in the kitchen, "He passes." "He passes what?" Natalie said. "The thing," Dana said. "The thing where I watch someone around Noah to see if they're performing or actually there. He's actually there." "I know," Natalie said. "I mean it, though. Some people are good at the big moments. He's good at the Tuesday moments. That's rarer." Natalie sliced cake without responding, but Dana knew her well enough to read the lack of response as agreement. Noah blew out 6 candles with the same focused determination he'd brought to 5, and again declined to reveal his wish on the same grounds as before. When James asked him if it was the same wish as last year, Noah considered this seriously and then said, "It's a related wish." James laughed the laugh of a man who has found, late in his life, an unexpected source of joy, and didn't press further. That night, after the guests had gone and Noah was asleep, and the flat was in the quiet aftermath of a party that had gone well, dishes done, surfaces cleared, the faint smell of cake still in the air, Ethan and Natalie sat on the small balcony off the sitting room with their jackets on because March in London requires jackets, even on good days. The city was doing its nighttime thing, distant sounds, the particular quality of urban dark that isn't quite dark because of all the ambient light, a siren somewhere far enough away to be background rather than event. "He wished for a dog last year," Natalie said. "He told me in December. He said the year was over, so the wish was done, and he could tell me." "Is he getting a dog?" "Absolutely not," she said. "We're in a rented flat, and I have a department to run. He's going to ask again this year. I know. She turned her mug in her hands. Maybe eventually, when we're back in New York and settled properly. He'd be a good dog person, Ethan said. He has the attention span for it. He has the attention span for things he's interested in, Natalie said. The jury's out on everything else. They sat for a while without talking. The particular comfortable silence that had developed between them over the past 8 months. Something earned, not assumed. Ethan reached into the pocket of his jacket. He'd been carrying the thing for 3 weeks, moving it from pocket to pocket, putting it in the drawer beside his bed, and then picking it back up again. He'd been waiting for the right moment, and he'd thought the right moment would announce itself clearly. And instead it had just arrived in the ordinary way that most significant things do, without announcement, in a Tuesday moment, on a balcony in London in March, while the city made its noises below. He held it out to her. It was a paper flower. Small, slightly imperfect, the paper a little worn at the edges from weeks of being carried. He'd made it from a piece of paper he'd torn from a notebook, the same way he'd made her one on their first date. A terrible one. He'd never been able to do them properly. While she was in the kitchen making coffee, and his hands needed something to do because he was nervous. He'd been nervous on their first date too, which was the thing he'd been thinking about when he started folding. Natalie looked at it. She was very still. It's not a ring, he said. I have a ring, but that felt like something you do after the question, not the question itself. She looked at the paper flower in his open hand, then at him. The question, she said carefully. Not a yes or a no. A space for him to actually ask. I want to marry you, he said. Not I want you to marry me. I want to marry you, which was the version he'd arrived at after thinking about it for a long time because the direction mattered. I want the thing where we're building the same life, not parallel lives that touch at Noah. The same life. He paused. I know we got here backwards. I know I don't get to pretend the backwards part didn't happen, but I'm asking for the forward part. With you. If you want that too. Natalie looked at the paper flower. She took it from his hand carefully, the way she'd taken the badly folded thing Noah had given her in the hospital hallway 2 years ago. 2 hands, like it was something worth holding. The first time you made me one of these, she said, I told you it was terrible. It was terrible, he said. This one is also not great. It's slightly better, she said. I've been practicing. She turned the flower in her fingers. Something in her face was doing the thing it did when she was working through something that mattered. Not shutting down, just going internal for a moment, the processing that preceded her arriving at whatever was true. I've been angry at you, she said, for a long time. Not all the time, and not always consciously, but underneath things. In the places where I'd made my peace with it, but the peace was more like a ceasefire than an actual end. I know, he said, and that's something I needed to say before anything else, because I don't want to bring it into whatever comes next without naming it. Okay. I'm not still in the ceasefire, she said. That's what I'm saying. I'm past it. Not because you fixed it. People don't fix things like that for other people. But because somewhere in the last year she looked at the paper flower. I let it go. I didn't plan to. It just went. Because things changed, he said. Because you changed, she said, which I didn't think I was going to believe. But I do. She looked at him. I actually believe you. He said nothing. He understood this was the most significant sentence she'd said to him in 2 years, and it deserved to stand on its own. Yes, she said. Just that. He exhaled. He hadn't known he'd been holding it until he let it go. She looked at the paper flower one more time and then at him with the expression she had when she wasn't managing anything. Just present. Just her. The unguarded version he'd been catching in glimpses for months and now held in the full light. You said you have a ring, she said. I do. Where? Bedroom drawer, he said. She stood up from her chair. He stood up too. She took his hand, the same way she'd turned her hand over in the dark of the plane and let their palms rest together, and they went inside. They told Noah in the morning. He was eating toast when they sat down at the kitchen table with him. He looked up, read the room, and said, Is this an important talk? Yes, Natalie said, but a very good one. Okay? He put his toast down and gave them his attention. Your dad asked me to marry him, Natalie said. Noah looked at Ethan. What did she say? She said yes, Ethan said. Noah thought about this. So you'll be married, he said, like properly.
Like properly, Natalie confirmed. He appeared to process the structural implications. So we'll all live together? In the same house? In the same home, yes, Ethan said. Not this flat, though, Noah said. It doesn't have enough room. We'll find something bigger, Natalie said. Noah picked his toast back up. Can we get a dog when we find the bigger place? Noah, Natalie started. That's a separate question, Ethan said. For a separate conversation. Noah looked between them. He appeared to run an internal calculation. You both said it was a separate question, he said. Not that it was no. You're not wrong, Ethan said. Natalie looked at Ethan. You're going to be the reason we have a dog, she said. I'm going to be the reason Noah has a dog, Ethan said. There's a difference. There genuinely isn't. Noah ate his toast with the satisfaction of a person who considers the morning to have gone well. They found a house in Hampstead in May, not large, not perfect, with a garden that needed work, and a kitchen that needed more work, and a third bedroom that was slightly too small, until you accepted that slightly too small was fine, actually, for what they needed. Natalie walked through it twice before she said anything, which was how she made decisions about things that mattered. Ethan waited. Noah ran from room to room reporting on each one with the systematic thoroughness of a property surveyor. This room gets the morning light, Noah reported from what would be his bedroom. That's good for the telescope. Is it? Natalie said. East-facing window. The sun comes up in the east. I know where the sun comes up, Natalie said. I'm just confirming the data, Noah said. They made an offer that afternoon. Bets. The wedding was in October, which in London is a gamble weather-wise that paid off. Clear and cool. The trees in the park near the Hampstead house doing the full autumn thing, all red and amber and gold in a way that felt, if you were inclined to read things into weather, like a comment on the season of life, rather than just the season. It was small. That had been the only thing they'd both been certain about from the beginning. Small, people who mattered, no performance. Dana was there, wearing something red that she'd bought specifically to stand out in photographs and making no apology for this. James and Margaret had come over a week early so that James could have, in his words, adequate time to enjoy London without rushing, which meant adequate time to eat things his cardiologist would not have approved of. Raymond and Sylvia Brooks had arrived the day before, and Raymond had shaken Ethan's hand at the door of the Hampstead house and said, "You did right," which was Raymond's version of a speech. Natalie's colleague, Dr. Okafor, came. She and Natalie had built the kind of friendship that happens between people who respect each other's work and have also survived institutional bureaucracy together, which creates its own bond. Two of Ethan's colleagues from his London firm came. A few others. 31 people in a garden that, after 3 months of work, no longer needed work. Noah was the one who walked Natalie to where Ethan was standing. He'd asked to do it. He'd asked very specifically, presenting the request with the directness he brought to things he'd thought about in advance. I want to be the one who walks Mama, he'd said, because I've been with her the whole time, so I should be the one who brings her. Nobody had argued with this. He was wearing a jacket in the particular shade of orange that remained his fundamental position on color, and he walked beside his mother with the serious, proud bearing of a 6-year-old who understands that he has been given something important to do and is doing it correctly. When they reached Ethan, Noah looked up at him and said, with quiet gravity, "Here she is." "I see her," Ethan said. "Thank you." Noah stepped back and went to stand with his grandparents, and Natalie turned to face Ethan fully, and the October light came in low and gold the way it does, and what they said to each other was not what they'd written. The written vows got set aside, as written things sometimes do when the moment arrives, and what's prepared turns out to be less true than what comes up instead. What Ethan said was, "You're the most honest person I know, and I spent years running from that because honest people can't be fooled, and I was trying to fool myself. I'm done doing that. I want to be worth your honesty. I'm going to spend a long time working on being worth it." What Natalie said was, "I'm not easy. I know I'm not easy. I process things slowly and I hold on to things longer than I should sometimes, and I'm not going to be someone who doesn't. But I'm going to be here. I'm going to be completely here. She paused. That's all I've got.
That's everything, Ethan said. Dana was crying, which she later maintained was a visual illusion. Raymond was definitely not crying, which was obvious to everyone present. James Carter sat in his chair in the garden of the Hampstead house and watched his son get married, and had the expression of a man who has been given, late in his life, the gift of seeing something resolved that he'd been afraid would stay broken. Noah, when it was over, went immediately to the table with the food. Basisats.
Here is what nobody tells you about second chances. They're not second chances at the first thing. That's the mistake people make, thinking that if you get another chance at something you lost, you're being returned to the same story. You're not. The people are different. The circumstances are different. The you that arrives at the second chance is shaped by everything that happened in between, and that shaping is permanent. You can't unknow what you learned. You can't unfeel what the hard years made you feel. This is, depending on how you look at it, either the loss inside the gift or the gift inside the loss. Ethan had left at 29 because he was afraid, not of Natalie, not of the relationship, but of what staying would require him to become. He was afraid that choosing home meant choosing limitation, that love and ambition were a zero-sum equation, that the life he wanted was somewhere else, and the life in front of him was a consolation. He had been wrong about all of those things in ways he could now see clearly because he'd lived on the other side of the wrongness for 5 years and learned precisely the shape of the mistake. Natalie had spent 5 years building something extraordinary out of circumstances she hadn't chosen. A life that was entirely hers, a son who was entirely himself, a career she'd constructed one careful decision at a time with fewer resources than she deserved. She had been angry, and right to be angry. And also she had metabolized the anger into something useful, which is not the same as forgiving it away, but is in some ways harder and more permanent. Noah had arrived into a world that was already complicated before he could form language to understand it, and he had made it, in the way children make things, entirely ordinary. He had a mother he trusted completely, and a father he'd grown into trusting, and grandparents, and a school with a teacher who talked to plants, and an ongoing argument about sharks versus crocodiles, and a telescope that needed the east window. He had, in the simple way that children have things, a family, not a perfect one. There was no version of this story where the years of absence became fine, where the pain of the beginning dissolved into the happiness of the middle and everything squared away cleanly. The painful parts left marks, as painful parts do, and the marks didn't disappear just because things got better. They became part of the texture of the people who carried them. That is, in fact, how it works. Not clean resolution, not healed without scarring, but something more honest. A scar is healed. That's what the word means. It means the wound closed and the body continued. They were healed in that way. All three of them, in their different ways, carrying what they carried and continuing. 2 years later, Natalie won a research award that she received at a dinner in London she attended with Ethan and Noah and Dr. Okafor, who had co-authored the neuroblastoma study that was, in part, the reason for the award. In her brief remarks, she kept them brief, not out of false modesty, but because she was a person who understood that gratitude doesn't require a long speech. She said that the research had been waiting for someone with enough time and enough resources to take it seriously, and that her only contribution had been to provide those things. Dr. Okafor, from her seat, shook her head visibly. Noah, age 7, sat at the dinner table in his jacket and ate his dinner and listened to his mother speak with the particular pride of a child watching a parent do something that the child doesn't fully understand but recognizes as significant. Afterward, he said to Ethan quietly, "She's really good at her job." "She's exceptional," Ethan said. "I know," Noah said, with exactly the tone of someone who has always known this and is simply confirming that the rest of the world has caught up. They moved back to New York the following year. Natalie had negotiated a partnership model with the Institute that let her maintain a research directorship from New York, coming over 4 times a year for extended periods. An arrangement that had required significant negotiation and that she'd conducted with the calm, patient firmness of someone who had learned to know what she was worth. They found an apartment on the Upper West Side, bigger than the old one, on a floor high enough that the telescope had a clear line to the southern sky. Noah started 2nd grade.
He brought his solar system book on the first day and showed it to his new teacher, who had a plant on her desk, which Noah took as a favorable sign. Ethan joined a New York-based firm with a scope that interested him, working hours that were demanding without being consuming, making the distinction he'd finally learned to make between work that builds something and work that just fills the available space. His father, now 2 years further out from the cardiac event and stubbornly thriving, came to dinner most Sunday evenings and held strong opinions about the designated hitter rule that put him in surprising alignment with Raymond Brooks, a discovery that had forged an unexpected alliance between the two grandfathers that neither of their children had anticipated. There was a dog. His name was Atlas. He was a mixed-breed rescue with strong feelings about squirrels and a sleeping preference for the foot of Noah's bed that he maintained with immovable conviction. Natalie had not been the one to choose him, but had also, within the first 2 weeks, been observed talking to him in a low, private voice about her day, a fact which she denied when Ethan mentioned it and about which he chose not to press further. There is a thing that people say about love, that it's a feeling, that it's the rush of the beginning, the certainty of early attraction, the particular electricity of a new thing. That's not wrong. But it's also incomplete in a way that matters. Love, the sustained kind, the kind that survives being wrong and being right, and being absent and returning and all the complicated geography in between. That's not a feeling, or not only a feeling, it's more like a practice. A daily choice that looks small from the outside because it lives in Tuesday moments. The dinner on the hard day, the hand on the shoulder passing through the kitchen, the question asked and the answer actually listened to, the staying when staying is difficult, the returning when you have been away. Ethan had learned this the long way. He had spent 5 years in a city across an ocean from his own life, and the life had still been there when he came back to it, which was luck he had not earned but was determined not to waste. He had earned other things, the slow accumulation of Tuesday moments, the trust of a child who had every reason to withhold it, the return of an honesty between himself and Natalie that ran underneath everything they said to each other and held it up. He thought about the version of himself who got on the plane to London at 29 with the certainty of a man who has decided that the future is somewhere else. He didn't hate that person. He understood him. The man had been afraid and had run from the fear in the only direction he knew how to run, and he had lived with the consequence of that for years in ways both visible and invisible. He was glad most days that he had come back. Not just for Noah, though Noah was the central, irreducible fact of everything, but for the person he'd become in the coming back. The version of himself who could hold a scared kid on a bathroom floor through a meltdown and not need to fix it. Who could hear a hard thing said directly and not deflect. Who understood finally that being present is not a passive state but an active one, something you have to keep choosing, and that the choosing is not a burden but the entire point. Natalie had her own accounting to do, her own private version of this, and it was hers and not his to narrate. What he knew was that she had arrived on the other side of a very difficult decade as someone complete in herself, not in spite of what she'd carried, but with it woven in, made part of the structure. She was more herself at 37 than she had been at 28, and the more was real, not performance. And Noah, who had wished the same wish 2 years in a row at his birthday candles, and finally, at 7, declared the wish finished. When Ethan asked him what it had been, Noah said, with the particular tone of someone sharing information that has become historical, "I wished for us to all be in the same place." "And?" Ethan said. "And we are," Noah said simply. "So it worked." He said it without drama, without sentiment, with the plain, factual satisfaction of someone whose experiment has returned the expected result and who is now ready to move on to the next question, which was, apparently, whether Atlas could be taught to recognize Jupiter in the night sky. "Dogs are colorblind," Ethan said. "Their night vision is different from ours." "But they have better smell," Noah said. "Maybe space smells like something to dogs." "Space doesn't have a smell," Ethan said. "We don't know that," Noah said. "We've never been there." He had his mother's logic and his father's stubbornness, and he was entirely himself, which was the only thing either of them had ever wanted for him. He was also, at this moment, lying on his back in the park, 2 blocks from the Upper West Side apartment on a clear September night, with the telescope set up beside him and Atlas sitting at his feet with the patient dignity of a dog who has concluded that his job is to stay near the boy, regardless of what the boy is doing. Natalie was on her back beside Noah, pointing at something in the sky that Ethan couldn't see from where he was sitting. He was sitting on the blanket they'd brought, his back against the bench, watching them. The two of them looking up at the same piece of sky, talking in the low, rapid register they used when they were deep in something together. He had a photograph from 5 years ago in his mind. The one he hadn't taken, but that existed anyway, burned into his memory from the day in the hospital hallway. Natalie crouched down to Noah's level, the badly folded paper in the small hands, the stethoscope around her neck, the complete ease of two people who had built everything there was between them without him. He had stood in that hallway and felt the full weight of his absence as a physical thing. He sat in the park now and felt the full weight of his presence. Different kind of weight. The good kind. The kind that means you're actually somewhere, that you landed and stayed. Natalie said something to Noah, and Noah laughed, the full-body laugh he had, the one that involved his whole face and that had been making people smile at him his whole life without his knowing it. She turned and looked at Ethan over her shoulder. "Come look," she said. "We found Saturn." He got up from the blanket and went and lay down on the grass between them. The September ground cooled through his jacket, and looked up at where Noah was pointing and found, in the wide scatter of the night sky, a point of light that was slightly warmer than the others, slightly more present. "That one?" Ethan said. "That one," Noah said. "You can almost see the rings. Almost." He looked at it. The three of them looked at it together, in the dark of a park in the city where this story had started. The city they'd left and returned to. The city that had been waiting with the patient indifference of cities while they figured out what they were to each other. Atlas put his head down on Noah's foot and sighed. Above them, Saturn held its rings and made no comment, as planets do, leaving the interpreting to the people below who are always, in the end, the ones who decide what anything means.